Eleanor Hartwell pressed her face against the cold glass of her bedroom window, watching another wedding celebration unfold in the town square below. White ribbons danced in the autumn breeze, and the sound of fiddle music drifted up to her room. She counted the couples dancing, 12 pairs of young people spinning and laughing under the golden sunset. At 28 years old, Eleanor had watched this same scene play out dozens of times. Wedding after wedding, celebration after celebration, and always she remained upstairs, looking down at a world that seemed to exist without her. A dark red birthmark covered the left side of her face, stretching from her temple to her jaw like spilled wine on white cloth. Her left leg, weakened by childhood sickness, made her walk with a noticeable limp. These two things had shaped her entire life in ways she never asked for. The bedroom door creaked open behind her. "Eleanor, are you coming down for supper?" Her younger sister Lucy stepped inside, her own wedding dress hanging on the wardrobe door like a ghost made of silken dreams. "In a moment," Eleanor replied, not turning from the window. Lucy moved closer, following her gaze to the celebration below. "The Henderson boy married the baker's daughter today. Ma says it was the prettiest ceremony she's ever seen." Eleanor nodded but said nothing. She had known Tom Henderson since they were children. He used to pull her braids when they sat together in the one-room schoolhouse. For years, she had imagined he might see past her appearance to the person underneath. But Tom had chosen Pretty Mary from the bakery, just like every other man had chosen someone else. "The preacher asked me today when I plan to set my own wedding date," Lucy continued, fidgeting with her engagement ring. "I told him probably next spring, when the wild flowers bloom." Eleanor finally turned from the window. Her sister was beautiful in the way that made people stop and stare, smooth skin, bright eyes, and a smile that could light up the darkest room. Lucy was only 22, 6 years younger, but she would be married before the snow fell. "That sounds lovely," Eleanor managed to say, though the words felt like swallowing stones. Lucy studied her sister's face with concern. "Eleanor, I know. This must be difficult." "Please don't," Eleanor interrupted, raising her hand. "Let's just go down to supper." The dining room felt smaller than usual, with wedding talk filling every corner. Their mother, Mrs. Hartwell, was deep in conversation with their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, about flower arrangements and wedding cakes. Their father sat quietly at the head of the table, occasionally nodding when the conversation required his attention. Eleanor took her usual seat and served herself from the dishes of roasted chicken and vegetables. The food tasted like ash in her mouth as she listened to the excited chatter around her. "Eleanor has such a talent for arranging flowers," Mrs. Patterson was saying. "Perhaps she could help with Lucy's wedding bouquet?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Hartwell replied, not looking at her older daughter. "Eleanor has always been gifted with her hands. She'll make a wonderful helper for Lucy's special day." A helper. Always a helper, never a bride. Eleanor excused herself before dessert was served and walked out to the back garden. The evening air was cool against her skin, and she could still hear the distant sounds of the wedding celebration in the town square. She sat on the wooden bench her father had built years ago and looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Her mother's voice drifted through the open kitchen window, speaking to Mrs. Patterson in the tone people use when they think no one else is listening. "I worry about Eleanor," Mrs. Hartwell was saying. "Lucy will be married and gone soon, and then what? Eleanor is 28 now. The chances of her finding a husband at her age with her complications, well, I fear she'll likely remain a spinster. Perhaps it's God's plan for her to care for her father and me in our old age." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. Complications. Spinster. God's plan. As if her loneliness was somehow meant to be, as if she deserved nothing more than to tend to aging parents while life passed her by. Mrs. Patterson's voice was softer, more sympathetic. "She's such a kind soul, though, and so smart. Surely some man will see past her appearance." "Men don't marry women out of pity, Margaret," her mother interrupted. "And Eleanor's condition, well, it's quite noticeable. I've accepted that she'll never have the life other women have. We must be practical about these things." Eleanor's hand shook as she gripped the bench. Her mother spoke about her as if she were a burden, a problem to be managed rather than a daughter with hopes and dreams. The casual cruelty of it, the way they discussed her fate over dessert plates, made her chest tight with pain she couldn't express. She stood up on unsteady legs and walked deeper into the garden, past the neat rows of vegetables and herbs she tended every day. This garden was her escape, the one place where she felt useful and capable. Here her hands could make things grow and flourish. Here her appearance didn't matter. But tonight, even the garden felt like a prison. Eleanor sank to her knees beside the pumpkin patch and let the tears come. All the years of pretending it didn't hurt. All the smiles she'd forced when another friend announced their engagement. All the nights she'd lain awake imagining what it would feel like to have someone love her. It all came pouring out at once. "No man ever wanted me," she whispered to the empty air, her voice breaking on each word. "No man will ever want me." The truth of it felt like a weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She wasn't asking for much, not wealth or status or grand romance. She just wanted to matter to someone. She wanted to be chosen, to be seen as more than the woman with the marked face and the limping walk. The autumn wind rustled through the cornstalks, and Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, crying until her tears ran dry. Above her, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to her pain. She didn't know that in the shadows at the edge of their property, a figure watched her with understanding eyes. A man who had been camping in the woods beyond town, waiting for supplies to arrive at the general store, had heard her broken whisper carried on the night air. He stood perfectly still, recognizing something in her sorrow that matched his own. For 5 years he had lived as an outcast, wanted by the law and unwelcome in decent society. He understood what it meant to be unwanted, to be judged for things beyond your control. The man's name was Walker, though few people had reason to know it anymore. His own face bore scars from a hard life, and his hands were rough from years of running and hiding. Society had cast him out just as surely as it had overlooked the crying woman in the garden. As Eleanor finally stood and wiped her eyes, walking slowly back toward the house, Walker made a decision that would change both, their lives forever. He would wait until morning, but then he would speak to her. He would offer her something no one else ever had, a chance to escape the world that had rejected her. Eleanor climbed the stairs to her room, unaware that tomorrow would bring a stranger with an impossible promise. She settled into bed still, wearing her day clothes, too exhausted to change. Through her window she could see the last of the wedding guests making their way home, couples walking arm in arm under the starlight. For the first time in years, Eleanor didn't wonder what it would feel like to be one of them. Instead, she closed her eyes and tried to imagine a world where such dreams didn't hurt so much to have. Outside in the darkness, Walker settled against a tree trunk to wait for dawn. He had survived 5 years as a wanted man by trusting his instincts, and those instincts told him that the woman in the garden was ready to hear what he had to say. Neither of them slept well that night, but for the first time in a long time, both would wake to the possibility of something different. Eleanor woke before sunrise, as she had every morning for the past 10 years. The house was quiet, her family still sleeping off the excitement of the previous day's wedding celebration. She dressed quickly in her work clothes and made her way down to the kitchen, where she lit the stove and put coffee on to brew. The morning ritual was always the same: tend the fire, check on the bread rising in the pantry, gather eggs from the chicken coop, and then spend the early hours in her garden before the rest of the world stirred. It was the only time of day that truly belonged to her. The back door creaked as she stepped outside, and the cool morning air helped clear the fog of sadness that had settled over her the night before. Dew clung to the pumpkin vines and made the tomato plants glisten like they were covered in tiny diamonds. This was her sanctuary, the place where her hands could work miracles even if her face couldn't win hearts. Eleanor knelt beside the herb patch and began pulling weeds, letting the familiar work calm her restless mind. She was so focused on her task that she didn't notice the figure approaching from the tree line until his shadow fell across the plants. "Good morning, miss." Eleanor looked up with a start. her heart hammering in her chest. A man stood at the edge of her garden, hat in hand, keeping a respectful distance. He was older than her, maybe in his mid-30s, with weather-beaten skin and clothes that had seen better days. His dark hair was longer than most men wore it, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. "I'm sorry to startle you," he continued, his voice gentle despite his rough appearance. "I was wondering if you might have some work I could do in exchange for a hot meal. I've been camping in the woods and I haven't had a proper breakfast in 3 days." Eleanor struggled to her feet, brushing dirt from her apron. No decent woman should be talking to a strange man alone, especially not one who looked like he'd been living rough. But something in his eyes stopped her from calling for her father. We don't usually," she began, then found herself really looking at him. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands, though calloused and scarred, were steady and respectful as he held his hat. Most importantly, he wasn't staring at her birthmark or looking uncomfortable in her presence. "I can split wood, mend fences, dig holes for fence posts," he offered. "Whatever needs doing. I'm not asking for charity, just honest work for honest pay." Eleanor glanced toward the house. Her father had been talking for weeks about needing to repair the chicken coop before winter set in. The fence around the vegetable garden had several loose boards that let rabbits sneak in and steal her produce. "What's your name?" she asked. "Walker," he replied. "Just Walker." Something about the way he said it told Eleanor that wasn't the whole truth, but she found she didn't care. "There is some work that needs doing," she said slowly. "But I'd need to ask my father first." Walker nodded. "Of course, I'll wait right here." Eleanor walked back toward the house, then stopped and turned around. "The coffee should be ready by now. Would you like a cup while you wait?" The surprise that crossed Walker's face made her wonder how long it had been since someone had offered him simple kindness. "That would be very welcome, miss, thank you." She brought him coffee in her father's second-best mug, along with a thick slice of bread spread with butter and jam. Walker accepted it with genuine gratitude, and Eleanor noticed he didn't gulp it down like a starving man might, despite claiming he hadn't eaten well in days. "This is mighty fine coffee," he said, "and the finest bread I've tasted in months." "I baked it yesterday," Eleanor replied, then felt foolish for the pride in her voice. Of course she had baked it. What else would she have been doing while other women her age were dancing at wedding receptions? Her father appeared on the back porch, drawn by the sound of unfamiliar voices. Walker immediately stood and approached him with respectful deference. "Good morning, sir. I was just asking your daughter if you might have some work I could do in exchange for breakfast. I'm handy with tools and not afraid of hard labor." Mr. Hartwell looked Walker up and down with the careful eye of a man who had lived through difficult times himself. "What kind of work you done before?" "Farm work, mostly. Some carpentry. I've built barns, mended roofs, cleared fields. Whatever needed doing." Eleanor watched her father consider the offer. The chicken coop really did need fixing, and hiring someone from town would cost money they couldn't easily spare. "The chicken coop needs new boards and a proper door, mister," Hartwell said finally. "The old one's hanging by a thread. You fix that properly and my wife will make sure you get a good breakfast and something for the road." "That's more than fair, sir. I'll do good work for you." Eleanor felt a strange flutter in her chest as she watched Walker shake hands with her father. There was something about the way he carried himself, respectful but not servile, humble but not broken. She had met plenty of drifters and traveling workers over the years, and most of them had a desperate edge that made her uncomfortable. Walker was different. As the morning progressed, Eleanor found herself glancing toward the chicken coop more often than necessary. Walker worked with quiet efficiency, measuring twice and cutting once, taking apart the old door with care to save any wood that could be reused. He whistled softly while he worked, not the loud, attention-seeking whistle of a man trying to impress, but the unconscious tune of someone content with his task. Her mother emerged from the house around mid-morning, took one look at Walker, and immediately began fussing about having a stranger on the property. But even Mrs. Hartwell had to admit he was doing good work when she saw how carefully he was crafting the new door. "Eleanor, bring that man some water," her mother instructed. Can't have him collapsing from thirst in our yard. Eleanor filled a pitcher with fresh water and carried it out to the chicken coop, along with a clean glass and a towel for Walker to wipe the sweat from his face. "Thank you kindly," he said, accepting the water gratefully. "Your father was right about this door. Another week and your chickens would have been sleeping under the open sky. You do good work," Eleanor observed, admiring the neat joints and careful measurements. Walker paused in his drinking. "Your garden there. That's all." "You're doing?" Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Yes, I've been tending it for years. It's beautiful work," Walker said, and something in his tone made Eleanor look at him more closely. "Takes real knowledge to get plants to grow like that. And patience. Not everyone has the gift for making things flourish." No one had ever called her gardening a gift before. Useful, practical, helpful, but never a gift. "Do you garden?" she asked. Walker's expression grew distant. "Used to. Had a small place of my own once, grew vegetables and herbs for the local doctor. Found I had a knack for the medicinal plants especially." He shook himself as if coming back from a far-off place. That was a long time ago. Eleanor wanted to ask what had happened to his garden, why he was living in the woods instead of tending his own land. But something in his eyes warned her off the subject. The afternoon passed quickly. Walker finished the chicken coop by early evening, and Mrs. Hartwell grudgingly admitted it was the finest work they'd had done in years. She packed him a generous meal of fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie, along with enough coffee for several days. Eleanor walked with him to the edge of their property as the sun began to set. She told herself it was just politeness, but truthfully, she wasn't ready for him to disappear back into the woods. "Thank you for the work," Walker said as they reached the tree line. "Your family showed me more kindness today than I've received in months." "You earned it," Eleanor replied. "The chicken co-op looks better than it did when it was first built." Walker studied her face in the dying light, and Eleanor realized he was one of the few men who had ever looked directly at her without flinching or looking away from her birthmark. "Miss Eleanor," he said quietly, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but I was passing by your garden last night when I heard you crying." Eleanor's face burned with embarrassment. "You shouldn't have been listening to private moments. You're right, and I apologize for that. But what I heard, those words about no man wanting you, they're not true." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "You don't know anything about my life." "I know more than you might think," Walker replied. "I know what it's like to be unwanted by the world. I know how it feels to be judged for things you can't control. I've been running from the law for 5 years now, and in all that time, I've never found a place where I truly belonged." Eleanor stared at him. "You're wanted by the law?" Walker nodded grimly. "For stealing food during the hard winter 3 years back. Railroad company was hoarding grain while families starved, so I took what people needed to survive. Law doesn't much care about the why of it." Eleanor should have been afraid, should have run back to the house and told her father to get his rifle. Instead, she found herself thinking about the careful way Walker had worked, the respect he'd shown her family, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke about her garden. "There's a place," Walker continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "A hidden valley about 3 days' ride north of here. Small group of folks living there. People who don't fit anywhere else. They don't ask questions about your past or judge you for how you look. They only care about the—" Eleanor spent the entire next day in a state of nervous energy that made her family wonder if she was coming down with something. She burned the breakfast biscuits, forgot to collect the eggs until well past noon, and spent so much time staring, off into space, that her mother asked 3 times if she was feeling well. "I'm fine, Ma," Eleanor kept saying, but she wasn't fine at all. She was terrified and excited and confused all at the same time. Every rational part of her mind said that meeting Walker at sunset was the most foolish thing she could possibly do. He was a stranger, a man wanted by the law, someone who had appeared out of nowhere with wild tales about hidden valleys where outcasts lived in peace. Nice women didn't run off with mysterious men, especially not women who had responsibilities to their families. But then she would remember the way he had looked at her, not with pity or discomfort, but with genuine respect. She would think about his words about her garden being beautiful work, about her having gifts the world was too blind to see. No one had ever spoken to her that way before. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor found herself mentally cataloging the things she would miss if she left. The herb garden she had spent years perfecting, the way the morning light fell across the kitchen table, her father's quiet presence reading his newspaper by the fireplace, her sister's laughter filling the house. But then she would remember her mother's words about her remaining a spinster, about it being God's plan for her to care for aging parents while life passed her by. She thought about all the weddings she had watched from her bedroom window, all the conversations that stopped when she entered a room, all the years stretching ahead of her exactly like the years behind her. By 5 o'clock, Eleanor had made her decision. She packed a small bag with her most practical clothes, the little money she had saved from selling vegetables at the farmer's market, and a few precious items. Her mother's recipe book, a pressed flower from her first successful rosebush, and the small silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. She left a letter on her pillow explaining that she had gone to seek a different life, that she loved her family, but couldn't spend the rest of her days being seen as a burden or a failure. She asked them not to worry and not to try to find her. The walk to the lightning-scarred oak tree felt like the longest mile of her life. With every step, Eleanor expected to lose her nerve and turn back. But as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, she kept walking. Walker was there waiting for her, as she had somehow known he would be. He had a horse, a sturdy brown mare that looked well cared for despite their circumstances, and a pack that seemed to contain everything he owned. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said simply. Eleanor lifted her chin, trying to look more confident than she felt. "I wasn't sure either, until I was walking here." Walker studied her small traveling bag and the determination in her face. "Once we leave here, there's no easy way back, you understand that?" "I understand." Eleanor surprised herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Tell me more about this place you're taking me to." As Walker helped her mount the horse behind him, he began to describe the hidden valley in more detail. "It's called Haven by the folks who live there, though that's not a name you'll find on any map. About 40 people, maybe 50 now. There's a woman named Beth who used to be married to a man who beat her near to death before she escaped. A fellow called Joseph who came up from the south after the war, couldn't find anywhere that would let him live in peace. Twin brothers, who were thrown out of their town for being too different, though they're the finest carpenters you ever saw." Eleanor listened as they rode through the darkening countryside, leaving the familiar lights of her hometown behind. Walker's voice was soothing in the darkness, painting pictures of a community she could barely imagine. "There's families there too," he continued. "Kids running around playing games, learning to read and write. Everyone contributes what they can, farming, building, teaching, healing. Beth knows more about birthing babies and treating sickness than most doctors. Joseph can make furniture so beautiful it would sell for a fortune in the big cities if he ever wanted to leave and sell it. And no one asks questions about where people came from. The rule is simple," Walker explained. "Your past is your business to share or not share as you choose. What matters is how you treat people and whether you do your part to keep the community strong." They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horse and share some of the food Walker had packed. Eleanor had never been more than a few miles from home before, and the vast darkness around them should have been frightening. Instead, she found it liberating. Out here, she wasn't the spinster daughter or the woman with the marked face. She was just Eleanor, riding toward an unknown future. As dawn broke on their second day, Walker pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a creek that ran in an unusual zigzag pattern, a stand of trees that had been struck by lightning years ago and grown back in twisted shapes. "I'm memorizing the way," he explained, "in case you ever need to travel this route alone." Eleanor realized he was teaching her to be independent, even as she depended on him to guide her to safety. It was a kindness she hadn't expected. They talked as they traveled, sharing stories in a way Eleanor had never done with anyone before. Walker told her about his childhood on a farm much like her father's, about the years he had spent learning, carpentry and farming before the hard winter that changed everything. He spoke about the families he had seen starving while the railroad company kept grain locked in warehouses, about the choice between letting people die and breaking laws that seemed more interested in protecting property than people. "I didn't set out to become an outlaw," he said. "I just couldn't stand by and watch children starve when there was food sitting right there." Eleanor found herself telling Walker things she had never spoken aloud, about the loneliness of being the woman everyone pitied but no one chose, about her love for growing things and her dream of someday having a garden where she could grow healing herbs for people who needed them, about the way she felt invisible most of the time but hyper-visible whenever someone noticed her birthmark. "In Haven, there's a woman named Grace who lost her arm in a factory accident," Walker said, "and a man called Thomas who stammers so badly he can barely get words out. Another fellow, Daniel, who came back from the war with shaking hands and nightmares. They're all just part of the community. Their differences don't define them or limit them." On their second night, as they camped beside a small stream, Eleanor asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you really come back to town? That day? You said you were waiting for supplies, but you could have just bought what you needed and left." Walker was quiet for a long moment, staring into their small campfire. "I've been running for 5 years," he said finally. "Living rough. Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I was tired, Eleanor. Bone deep tired of being alone." He looked up at her. "When I heard you crying that night, heard those words about no one wanting you, I recognized something in that pain, and I thought maybe we could help each other." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "You were lonely too. Lonelier than I care to admit. But it's more than that. I saw how you cared for that garden, how you treated me with kindness when you had no reason to. I thought someone like you might find a home in Haven, and maybe I could be part of giving you that chance." On their third morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of horses in the distance. Walker was already up, his face grim as he studied the horizon. "Behind them. We're being followed," he said quietly. "3 riders, maybe 4. They've been tracking us since yesterday." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "The law?" "Most likely. Someone in town must have reported seeing us leave together." Walker began breaking camp with swift efficiency. "We need to move fast now. The valley. Entrance is still a half-day's ride, but it's through rough country where horses can't follow easily." As they rode hard across increasingly wild terrain, Eleanor found herself thinking about the choice she had made. Behind them were men who would take her back to her old life of quiet desperation. Ahead was uncertainty, but also the possibility of something she had never dared to hope for, a place where she could belong. "Whatever happens," she called to Walker over the sound of hoofbeats, "I'm glad I came with you." Walker turned in the saddle and smiled, the first truly happy expression she had seen from him. "Whatever happens, Eleanor, you're the bravest person I've met in a long time." The pursuing riders were getting closer, their shouts echoing across the empty landscape. But Eleanor could see something else ahead, a narrow gap between 2 towering rock walls that looked like it might be the entrance Walker had described. As they raced toward the gap, Eleanor realized she wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in her life, she was running toward something instead of away from it. Whatever waited for her on the other side of those stone walls, it had to be better than the life she had left behind. The sound of pursuit grew louder, but Walker urged the horse faster, and Eleanor held on tight as they plunged into the narrow passage that would either lead them to freedom or trap them with nowhere left to run. The narrow canyon passage opened suddenly into the most beautiful valley Eleanor had ever seen. Rolling green hills dotted with wildflowers stretched out before them, and a clear stream wound through the center like a silver ribbon. Neat log cabins were scattered throughout the valley, with gardens and small fields surrounding each one. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and she could see people working in the distance, some tending crops, others hanging laundry to dry in the mountain air. It looked like something from a fairy tale, a hidden paradise that couldn't possibly exist in the real world. But here it was, spread out before her like a promise kept. "Welcome to Haven," Walker said, and Eleanor could hear the pride in his voice. As they rode down into the valley, people began to emerge from their homes and work areas. Eleanor's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. More strangers to stare at her face, more people to judge her appearance. But as the residents of Haven gathered around them, something remarkable happened. No one stared. No one looked away uncomfortably. They greeted Walker with obvious pleasure and welcomed Eleanor with genuine warmth that had nothing to do with politeness. A woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes stepped forward. "Walker, we wondered when you'd make it back, and you've brought a friend." "This is Eleanor," Walker said, helping her down from the horse. "Eleanor, meet Beth, the finest healer in 3 states and the closest thing Haven has to a mayor." Beth clasped Eleanor's hands in both of hers, looking directly into her face without a trace of discomfort at the birthmark. "Eleanor, what a lovely name. Welcome to our home. I hope you'll stay long enough for us to show you proper hospitality." A tall man with dark skin and gentle eyes approached next. "Joseph," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "I help coordinate the building projects around here. That's a fine horse you rode in on. Someone's been taking good care of her." Before Eleanor could feel overwhelmed by all the new faces, a group of children came running over, their curiosity overriding their manners. "Are you going to live here, too?" asked a little girl with pigtails. "We don't get new people very often." "Hush, Lily," said an older boy, maybe 12 years old. "Let the lady catch her breath first." Eleanor found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "It's all right. I like children." She knelt down to the little girl's level. "I'm Eleanor. What's your name?" "I'm Lily, and this is my brother Ben," the girl replied, then pointed to other children gathering around. "And that's Anna and Charlie and baby Rose, but she can't talk yet." "Lily's right that we don't get many new residents," Beth said. "Most folks who find us are running from something, or someone. We don't ask questions, but we do ask that everyone contribute to the community in whatever way they can." Walker helped Eleanor retrieve her small bag from the horse. "Eleanor has a gift with plants," he told Beth. "She grew the most remarkable garden I've ever seen, vegetables, herbs, flowers. Everything flourished under her care." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the praise, but Beth's eyes lit up with interest. "Is that so? Come, let me show you something." Beth led Eleanor toward a small cabin on the eastern edge of the settlement. "This was built for our last healer, but he moved on about 6 months ago to be closer to his grandchildren. The herb garden has been sadly neglected since then." Eleanor gasped when she saw the neglected plot behind the cabin. Even overgrown with weeds, she could see the careful planning that had gone into its original design. Raised beds arranged to catch the morning sun, a small greenhouse for starting seedlings, neat rows that had once held medicinal plants now choked with brambles. "It would take a lot of work to restore it," Beth said, carefully watching Eleanor's face. Eleanor was already kneeling beside one of the beds, her hands moving instinctively to pull a few weeds away from a struggling mint plant. "This sage could be saved," she murmured, then looked up at a healthy-looking tree. "Is that willow? The bark is excellent for pain relief, and this soil, it's rich, well-drained, perfect for most healing herbs." Beth smiled. "I had a feeling you might see the potential. Would you like to see the inside of the cabin?" The little house was simple but well-built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a small bedroom and a storage room that had obviously been used for drying herbs. Bundles of long-dead plants still hung from the rafters, and Eleanor could imagine the space filled with the sweet, earthy smells of a working herbalist's home. "It's perfect," Eleanor breathed, then caught herself. "I mean, if I were to stay, I haven't decided anything yet." "Of course not," Beth said kindly. "You need time to think. For tonight, you're welcome to stay with me and my husband. Tomorrow you can meet more of our community and see if this might be the place for you." As evening fell, Eleanor found herself sitting around a large fire pit in the center of the settlement, surrounded by people who had welcomed her without question. There was Grace, the woman Walker had mentioned who lost her arm in a factory accident. She was now the community's seamstress and had made beautiful quilts that decorated several of the cabins. Thomas, who did indeed stammer, turned out to be a gifted storyteller who had the children hanging on every word despite his halting speech. The twin brothers Walker had mentioned, Peter and Paul, were indeed master carpenters. They had built most of the homes in Haven, and their work was so beautiful that Eleanor understood why Walker had compared it to artwork. "We each contribute what we can," explained a woman named Ruth, who had arrived at Haven 5 years earlier with her 3 children after escaping an abusive marriage. "Some of us farm, some build, some teach the children, some keep us healthy. It's not always easy, but it's honest work for honest people." Eleanor listened to story after story of people who had found their way to Haven after being rejected or hurt by the outside world. A man who had lost his leg in a mining accident and been turned away from every job he sought. A woman whose family had disowned her for refusing an arranged marriage to a cruel man. An elderly couple who had been driven from their home by neighbors, who thought they were too old and poor to deserve decent treatment. "The rule here is simple," Beth explained. "We don't judge people for their past or their appearance or their struggles. We judge them by how they treat others and whether they do their part to help our community thrive." As the fire died down and people began drifting back to their homes, Eleanor felt a peace she had never experienced before. For the first time in her adult life, she was in a place where being different wasn't a liability. Walker walked her back to Beth's cabin, both of them quiet in the starlight. "It's real," Eleanor said softly. "I wasn't sure I believed it could be real." "It's real," Walker confirmed. "Not perfect, no place is, but it's real. People here have disagreements and bad days just like anywhere else. But they face them together, and no one gets cast out for being human." Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him. "Why didn't you stay here before? If this place exists, why were you living rough in the woods?" Walker was quiet for a moment. "I've been running for so long I forgot how to stop. And I suppose I thought I didn't deserve a place like this." He met her eyes. "But bringing you here, seeing how they welcomed you, it reminded me that everyone deserves a chance to belong somewhere." The next morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of children's laughter and the smell of fresh bread baking. Through the window, she could see people going about their morning routines, feeding animals, tending gardens, heading out to work in the fields. It looked so normal, so peaceful, that she had to remind herself these were all people who had been rejected by the outside world. Beth invited her to spend the day visiting different parts of the community. Eleanor met the teacher who ran the small school for the children, the blacksmith who kept their tools sharp and their horses shod, the women who managed the communal kitchen where everyone could come for meals when they didn't feel like cooking at home. But it was when Beth took her to see the current herb supplies that Eleanor truly understood how much she could contribute to Haven. "We've been making do with what grows wild," Beth explained, opening a cabinet that held their medical supplies. "But we're running low on several important remedies, and some of the plants we need don't grow naturally at this altitude." Eleanor examined the meager collection of dried herbs and prepared medicines. "You need willow bark for pain, chamomile for stomach troubles, echinacea for fighting illness, lavender for helping people sleep." She rattled off a dozen plants that should be part of any healer's garden. "Could you grow these things?" Beth asked hopefully. Eleanor looked out the window toward the neglected herb garden. In her mind, she could see it restored and thriving, filled with plants that could ease suffering and promote healing. She could imagine herself working in that garden every morning, harvesting and preparing medicines for people who needed them. "Yes," she said with growing excitement. "I could grow all of these and more. With the right setup, that garden could supply not just Haven but other communities in the area. There are people in the towns and farms around here who need healing, herbs, but can't afford to buy them from traveling medicine shows." Beth's eyes widened. "You mean we could help people beyond our own community?" The sound of approaching horses sent the entire community of Haven into immediate action. Children were quickly ushered into homes, and the adults gathered in the center of the settlement with a calm efficiency that spoke of having planned for this possibility. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest as she watched 4 armed men on horseback emerge from the canyon passage. The lead rider wore a sheriff's badge, and his stern expression left no doubt about why they had come. "We're looking for a wanted man named Walker," the sheriff called out. his voice echoing across the peaceful valley. "We have reason to believe he's hiding in this settlement, along with a young woman he may have kidnapped." Eleanor felt a flash of anger at the word kidnapped, but before she could speak, Beth stepped forward with the calm authority of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Good evening, Sheriff," she said politely. "I'm Beth, and I help coordinate things here in our community. No one in Haven is being held against their will, I can assure you of that." The sheriff's eyes swept over the gathered residents, taking in their calm faces and protective stances. "We tracked 2 riders to this valley, a man and a woman traveling together. The woman's family is worried sick about her." Eleanor felt Walker tense beside her, and she knew he was preparing to surrender himself to protect the community that had welcomed them. But something inside her rebelled against the idea of returning to her old life of quiet desperation. "I'm the woman you're looking for," Eleanor said, stepping forward. Her voice shook slightly, but she kept her chin raised. "And I wasn't kidnapped. I chose to leave." The sheriff studied her face, and Eleanor saw his expression soften slightly when he took in her birthmark. She realized he was probably thinking the same thing everyone in her hometown thought, that a woman who looked like her should be grateful for any attention, even from a wanted man. "Miss, your family sent us to bring you home safely," the sheriff said in a gentler tone. "They're worried that this man took advantage of you in a moment of weakness." "Walker didn't take advantage of anyone," Eleanor replied firmly. "He offered me a choice I'd never had before, the choice to live somewhere I was valued for who I am, not pitied for how I look." One of the deputies shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. "That's all well and good, miss, but this man is wanted for theft. He needs to come with us to face justice." Eleanor felt the community around her drawing closer, creating a protective circle without anyone saying a word. These people barely knew her, but they were willing to stand with her against armed lawmen. The realization gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. What exactly did Walker steal? Eleanor asked. The sheriff consulted a paper from his pocket. Grain and supplies from the railroad depot during the winter of 1887. Theft of property belonging to the Mountain States Railroad Company. "Food," Eleanor said, her voice growing stronger. "He stole food for starving families while the railroad company kept it locked in warehouses." "The law is the law," the sheriff replied. But Eleanor noticed he didn't meet her eyes when he said it. Beth stepped closer to Eleanor, a show of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Sheriff, might I ask, do you have children?" The question seemed to surprise him. 2 boys and a girl. And if they were starving while wealthy men hoarded food nearby, what would you do? The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. "That's not the point, isn't it?" This came from Joseph, the tall man who helped coordinate building projects. "The point is whether a man who feeds hungry children is really a criminal, or whether the criminals are the ones who let children starve for profit." Eleanor watched the sheriff's face as he looked around at the community, at the neat homes, the well-tended gardens, the children peering out from doorways with curious rather than fearful eyes. This wasn't a den of thieves and outcasts. This was a place where decent people had built something good together. "Even if that's true," the sheriff said finally, "I have my orders. Walker needs to come with us." "Then I'm going too," Eleanor said immediately. Walker turned to her with alarm. "Eleanor, no, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Eleanor's voice was steady now, filled with a certainty she had never felt before. "If Walker goes to jail for feeding hungry families, then I want to stand trial beside him, because I'd rather be in prison with someone who cares about others than free in a place where caring is seen as a crime." The sheriff looked genuinely troubled now. "Miss, you haven't done anything wrong. You can come home with us, and no charges will be filed." "Home?" Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean back to a place where I'm seen as a burden? Where my own mother talks about me like I'm a problem to be solved? Where the best I can hope for is spending my life, caring for other people while no one cares about me?" She gestured around the valley. "In 2 days here I've been offered meaningful work, treated with respect and welcomed as part of a community. I've found people who see my skills as gifts instead of my appearance as a flaw. This is the first place I've ever felt like I truly belong. The sheriff's deputies were shifting uncomfortably in their saddles. Eleanor realized that her words were having an effect not just on their leader, but on all of them. These were probably decent men who had families of their own, who understood the difference between right and wrong even when the law got in the way. If you take Walker away from here, Eleanor continued, you're not just arresting one man. You're destroying the sense of safety that lets this community exist. These people have found a place where they can live in peace, where they contribute to something bigger than themselves, where their differences are accepted rather than condemned. Beth nodded. Haven exists because people like Walker were willing to risk everything to help others. If that makes us criminals, then perhaps the law needs examining. The sheriff looked around at the faces surrounding him, people of different backgrounds and abilities, but all united in their determination to protect what they had built together. Eleanor could see him weighing his duty as a lawman against his conscience as a human being. You folks seem to have built something good here, he said slowly, but I can't just ignore my warrant. What if Walker served his time differently? Eleanor asked suddenly. What if instead of sitting in jail, he spent the next few years helping people, really helping them in ways that matter? The sheriff raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Eleanor felt the idea forming as she spoke. Haven could become an official way station for travelers, a place where people could get medical care, supplies, and shelter. Walker could help run it along with the rest of us. Instead of being a burden on the state prison system, he could be contributing to society in a way that actually helps people. Beth's eyes lit up with understanding. We could formalize what we're already doing, helping people who have nowhere else to turn. Make it official, with reports to the territorial government. Joseph nodded enthusiastically. We've got the skills here: carpentry, farming, healing, teaching. We could help travelers, provide supplies to isolated homesteads, even offer emergency medical care to communities that don't have doctors. The sheriff considered this. You'd be willing to accept official oversight? Regular inspections to make. Sure you're doing what you claim? If it means Walker doesn't have to rot in prison for helping hungry children, yes, Eleanor said immediately. Walker looked at her with amazement. Eleanor, you don't have to do this for me. I'm not doing it. Just for you, Eleanor replied. I'm doing it for all of us. This community deserves to exist, and the work we could do here deserves to be recognized as valuable. The sheriff dismounted and walked closer to the group. Eleanor could see him studying their faces, taking in the genuine care they showed for each other and the obvious pride they took in their community. I'd need to telegraph the territorial governor, he said finally, and Walker would have to agree to restrictions on his movements until we could get official approval for this arrangement. I agree, Walker said immediately. And the sheriff looked at Eleanor. Your family will need to know you're safe and that you chose to stay here of your own free will. Eleanor nodded. I'll write them a letter explaining everything. They may not understand my choice, but they'll know it was mine to make. The sheriff was quiet for several long minutes, clearly wrestling with his decision. Finally, he looked up at the mountains surrounding the peaceful valley. I came here to arrest a criminal and rescue a kidnapped woman, he said slowly. But what I see is a man who helped feed hungry families and a woman who chose to build a life where she could make a difference. I see a community that's trying to do good work in a world that doesn't always reward goodness. He turned to Walker. You'll stay put until I hear back from the territorial capital. No leaving this valley without permission. And if this arrangement doesn't get approved, you'll come with me peacefully. Walker nodded. You have my word. The sheriff remounted his horse and looked down at the gathered community one last time. I hope this works out for you folks. The world could use more places like this. As the lawman rode back through the canyon passage, Eleanor felt her legs go, weak with relief. The community began to disperse, people returning to their homes and evening routines, but she remained standing.